there, my name is Pesky, and if you're returning for another cozy read, nice to see you again. If you're just joining us, welcome, and I hope you'll stick around. We're currently reading through True Ghost Stories, Real Haunted Hospitals and Asylums by Zachery Knowles. Since Halloween is just around the corner, it seems fitting to read about some spooky places. I do have 3 other videos with the previous stories in the book being read. The first is about Waverly Hills Sanatorium and Taunton State Hospital. In the second, we read about Old Chonky Hospital and Beechworth Lunatic Asylum. And in the third video, we read about Royal Hope Hospital, Metropolitan State Hospital, and Pripyat Hospital. For our next round of stories, we'll be reading about Kuhn Memorial State Hospital, the Old Mental Hospital, and Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. So grab yourself a cup of tea or whatever your preferred beverage is, get comfy, and let's get started. Kuhn Memorial State Hospital. In 1832, smallpox outbreaks left the community of Vicksburg, Mississippi in desperate need of help. Not long after, a small hospital was born, located between what is now downtown Vicksburg and the Vicksburg National Military Park. At the time it was built, no one had any idea what tragedies and horror would plague the hospital throughout its long history. Despite its role as a place of healing, dark events have followed Kuhn Memorial State Hospital like the plague. The modest hospital would go on to serve wounded during the Civil War until the state took over operations in 1971, renaming it the State Charity Hospital at Vicksburg. Tragedy struck in 1878 as yellow fever wreaked havoc on the patients and staff. 16 doctors and 6 Catholic Sisters of Mercy lost their lives to the illness, while the number of patients who died remains unknown. But the hospital persevered, hosting the University of Mississippi's first medical school in 1910 and opening a wing to house Confederate veterans. Then, in 1918, a mysterious fire, still unexplained to this day, destroyed most of the annex. But the hospital rebuilt again, continuing to serve the sick and wounded of Vicksburg. In 1954, it received its first stroke of real luck when an elderly man named Lee Kuhn passed away and left his $400,000 estate to the hospital. The money was used for further expansion, and the hospital was renamed Kuhn Memorial State Hospital, the name it carries to this day. The hospital went on to serve all sorts of patients and people. The 4th floor became a minimum security prison. Inmates were required to perform menial tasks for the staff, such as clerking and cleaning. The Confederate Veterans Annex was specialized for patients with mental disabilities, while the pest house contained patients with infectious diseases. For once, the hospital thrived. But despite its utility to the community, it was closed in 1989 due to political and funding issues. For more than 2 decades, Kuhn Memorial State Hospital lay empty, useless. The buildings crumbled and rusted, the interior molded, and like any empty building with easy access points, it attracted the attention of curiosity seekers and paranormal researchers. America was a volatile place during the early years of the hospital's operation. A combination of war and primitive medical services ensured that many lost their lives at Kuhn. Ghost hunters searched for any lost souls that may have lingered and were often surprised with how easily they were found. Though when 2 ghost hunters entered the old hospital in June 2015, they discovered something even more shocking than the spirits and apparitions they were searching for. In the building, they stumbled upon the body of Sharon Wilson, a 69-year-old woman who had only been reported missing only 12 hours before. They called the police, who found the death to be a homicide. Wilson had been murdered in the hospital shortly before the ghost hunters started their excursion. 2 men were arrested quickly when they were discovered driving Wilson's car. No one knows exactly what happened to Wilson or why. The case is pending today. What started out as spooky fun and games for paranormal researchers in an old building with a dark history became even more tragic. A roof of the front building started to collapse, prompting the state to talk seriously about demolishing the dilapidated complex. News reports from July 2015 say that on August 3rd, the historic hospital will be gone for good. David Childers, co-founder of the Mississippi Paranormal Research Institute, who conducted several ghost hunts in the hospital, agreed with the decision to demolish the building. There are open elevator shafts, black mold, asbestos, and debris, and people ought to stay away from that place, he told the Clarion Ledger. Some spirits just need to be left alone. That's the end of the Kuhn Memorial State Hospital story. I guess not a lot of ghosts in there. We might get luckier with the next one. Promising title. The Old Mental Hospital. Hong Kong is often viewed as one of the most modern cities in the world, full of new buildings with innovative designs. That's one of the reasons that a Victorian-style structure named the Old Mental Hospital is bound to get some strange looks from passers-by, found right in the middle of the city. But if you dig just a little deeper into the past of the historic building, you'll find a lot of other, more sinister reasons why the Old Mental Hospital stands out from the rest. The original building was built in 1892 in the Sai Ying Bun area of Hong Kong. At 9 stories tall, it first served as housing for the European nursing staff of the close-by civil hospital until World War II. But like most wartime facilities that were established with the best intentions, the hospital was later repurposed for a much darker task. According to urban legend, the Japanese used the hospital as a makeshift prison and execution hall during their occupation of Hong Kong. This may well have been true, as the Japanese commonly repurposed war hospitals to house anyone on the wrong side or anyone they suspected of anti-Japanese sentiment during the time. Rumor has it that many heads rolled through the floor in this house of healing, but only after a slew of torturous interrogation tactics. After the war was over, the old mental hospital was again repurposed into a mental institution, which is where it gets the modern rendition of its name. In 1947, the hospital was the only one of its type in Hong Kong, which is unsettling considering that the city was home to 500,000 people at the time. Once Hong Kong got a better handle on providing mental health facilities, the hospital was then diminished to a day treatment center for psychiatric outpatients. That it remained from 1961 to 1971. The intention was to reopen the building for some new purpose after that, but 2 devastating fires, believed to be started by trespassers, made the building uninhabitable. For 20 years after shutting down, the building remained unoccupied. Its historical architecture and expansive dark halls drew the attention of anyone who saw it, especially the local teenagers and drug addicts who visited the nearby methadone clinic. As the building fell further and further into disrepair, people started reporting strange happenings. Unwelcome reminders of the horror of the war. The locals started calling it the Haunted House in High Street, named after the road it was built on, inadvertently choosing the perfect name for a ghost story. Most of the ghost sightings you hear about in old dilapidated buildings consist of disembodied whispers, distorted apparitions, and other unexplainable occurrences. Often no one can say for sure whether they really saw something or not. That was never the case at the old mental hospital. People have reported time and again seeing the clear figure of a mysterious devil-like man dressed in traditional Chinese clothing. He commonly lurked on the 2nd floor and could have been confused for a local man hoping to scare people with a creepy costume. That is until he would summarily burst into flames shortly after being spotted, etching his image even further into the minds of unwanted visitors. Still, others have had the fright of their lives witnessing headless poltergeists running through the hallways in the dead of night. Could these be the troubled spirits of those tortured and executed dissidents during World War II? Many wonder. After far too many break-ins and unending reports of ghostly encounters had started giving the neighborhood a bad name, the old mental hospital was gutted and redeveloped as the Saying Community Complex in 2001. Now, only the Victorian facade remains of what was once a dark and mysterious testament to the history of World War II. That said, the shadows the sinister lighting cast over the high stone arches and empty verandas still make it look incredibly haunted. According to Haider Kikaboy, co-founder of Walk in Hong Kong, people who drive by the building still claim to hear ghostly voices, chilling screams, and visions of spirits despite the building's current role as a community complex. It would seem that gutting old mental was not enough to quell the cries and tantrums of the building's troubled spirits. Hong Kong recently classified the old mental hospital as a Grade 1 historic building, so the complex and all of its residents are here to stay. So another somewhat short story. I have never heard of the mental hospital before. Didn't sound very welcoming given the title, but again, connections with World War II, executions, torture. If it's haunted, who would be surprised? And now for the final story. I have heard of this place. I'm sure many of you have heard of this before. If you've seen videos on YouTube, you may have seen it on ghost hunting shows on the television. There's photos, stories everywhere on the internet. If you look, you don't have far to go to find things about this place. Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. Sounds lovely. The town of Weston, West Virginia began construction on an insane asylum in 1858. The project, powered by prison labor, was an unprecedented undertaking and took a long time. Construction had to halt for the Civil War and resumed again in 1862. The hospital was built on 666 acres of land, as it was common knowledge at the time that pollutants of the cities were a main cause of insanity. Fresh air and open spaces would be the most advanced treatment offered to the mentally ill. The goal for the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum was self-sufficiency, complete with a farm, dairy, waterworks, and cemetery. The second largest hand-cut stone building in the world, the Kremlin was larger. The hospital opened its doors officially in 1864. Per necessity, a separate section for African Americans was completed in 1873. I have no words. Despite such expansive grounds, Trans-Allegheny was designed to hold only 250 people, but that soon changed. By 1880, it held 717 patients. By 1938, it was up to 1,661 patients. There were more than 1,800 patients in 1949, and patient population peaked at 2,400 in 1950. According to a 1938 report by medical organizations, the hospital was home to epileptics, alcoholics, drug addicts, and non-educable mental defectives. Maybe they forgot to mention, or maybe it was in later years, that the hospital also housed children with Down syndrome and diabetes, disabled veterans with nowhere else to go, people with syphilis before the advent of penicillin, and one couple with AIDS who had their own personal apartment. As it turns out, fresh air and distance from the hustle and bustle of the cities were likely the kindest treatments offered at the hospital. Frontal lobotomies and electroshock therapy were commonly provided for the most difficult patients, helping them to calm down, or at least instilling enough fear in them that they would comply. Like many giant institutions at the time, overcrowding started to take its toll very early on. The Charleston Gazette wrote a series of exposés about the hospital in 1949, describing poor sanitation and the lack of supplies, furniture, lighting, and heating. By the 70s and 80s, things managed to get even worse, despite a relative decrease in patient population. Reports of patients killing other patients passed without investigation, and female nurses and staff were often assaulted. One nurse went missing only to be found dead at the bottom of an unused staircase nearly 2 months later. Doctors and staff started pulling out all the stops after that. Patients who could not be controlled were now locked in cages. It's pretty clear that no one will ever know the full extent of patient mistreatment during Trans-Allegheny's long history. Records from the hospital are amazingly incomplete. Many patients who checked in never seemed to check out. In the hospital's private cemetery, headstones are missing. Others are just numbered bricks, leaving no clues about their occupants. Hundreds are said to have died in the hospital, though with such shoddy record-keeping, some think there could have been thousands. According to Andrea Lamb, a tour guide at the now derelict facility, families were often discouraged from contacting their loved ones who were committed to the hospital. They were told if they ever got a letter from them to never even open it. Years of newspaper reports tell of Weston residents complaining about hearing patient screams from outside the 666-acre premises. City officials finally decided it was time to build a new psychiatric facility in the late 80s and made plans to turn Trans-Allegheny into a small prison. In the end, the hospital closed in 1994 because of concerns about patient treatment, never to open again. Unfortunately, many of the patients who had spent most of their lives at Trans-Allegheny were moved to other facilities, only to suffer worse mental illness or to die mysteriously shortly after. Despite being made a National Historic Landmark while still in operation, attempts to repurpose the building as a Civil War museum were short-lived because of fire code violations. The mental asylum sat more or less empty for 10 years, until the state auctioned it off to Joe Jordan, a private entrepreneur, in 2007. After millions of dollars of renovations and asbestos removal, Jordan and his family repurposed the building for concerts, events, and haunted hospital tours. Today, they offer paranormal tours 6 days a week, an increasingly popular attraction since the building was featured on several ghost hunting shows. While many owners of old buildings repurposed as haunted houses have to make some effort to promote the idea that the building is haunted, Trans-Allegheny's dark history does it all by itself. Rebecca Jordan Gleason, the building manager, said, "I don't want to believe in ghosts or the supernatural, but I've seen things here that are hard to explain by any other way." Most visitors never fail to experience some strange occurrence they can't explain. Battery drainage, cold spots, voices, strange figures on heat-seeking cameras. Many report hearing the sound of gurneys being pushed down the long hallways and screams coming from the electroshock area. Others insist they saw full-body apparitions of patients. Some ghosts, still living in the hospital, appear lighthearted, giggling and laughing throughout the building. Others offer clear and ominous warnings to get out. Visitors to the hospital sometimes feel ill after departing, overcome with the shakes or a lightheaded feeling. The majority of ghost sightings throughout the hospital appear to be unique, which isn't surprising considering the vast number of people who lived, suffered, and died at Trans-Allegheny. There is, however, one boy in particular who is seen over and over again, standing immobile in the corner of one room. Grant Wilson of the Atlantic Paranormal Society claimed to see this boy as well, but got more of a show than others. He said the apparition put his hands over its head and looked like he was being sucked out of the room. One other ghost, affectionately named Jacob, looks like a soldier and is often seen wandering around the Civil War wing. While freaky things regularly occur throughout the old hospital, everyone agrees that the 4th floor is the most haunted. Strange sounds, banging, voices, and whispered conversations can be heard on the usually empty floor. Ghosts up there like to keep visitors on their toes. Once, Gleason witnessed 40 open doors on the fourth floor hallway slam at once. One would be pretty scary, Gleason said. 40 at once was terrifying. And so that is Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. Lovely name. That brings us to the end of our reading for today. I hope that you enjoyed the stories. I'm not sure if we'll do 2 next time or if we'll do 3 next time. I'll have to check how many stories are left and how much time it takes to record the next 2 videos. Or if we're lucky, we can finish with those last stories, depending on how long they are. But again, thank you for listening, and I hope that you'll come back for the next Cozy Fireside story. With that, I hope you have a wonderful day, whether it's morning, afternoon, evening. I hope it's great. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.